Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are you today?
Very well, Brian. How are you?
Doing good. Yeah, everything's going good. Back in the saddle, so to speak, after our trip out to Phoenix. So yeah, everything's going good.
Nice. Clients treating you well? Did they all miss you?
Oh, horribly. No. Yeah, it's always interesting when you're away for 4 or 5 days. You come back and for some reason you have an experience and you're slightly changed.
Yes.
Even the slightest bit, you're changed. You come back, nothing's changed. Everything's exactly the same. It's kind of like, oh yeah, this is just how I left it. Okay, just a little bigger stack of stuff on the desk. Yeah.
The parallel universes, right? Of the travel universe and the back home universe.
Exactly. Yeah, we're gonna have a lot of that this summer.
Absolutely. No, both of us have got a lot of ins and outs and traveling to do. It'll be interesting.
Yep.
It feels like it used to feel in the pre days, the before days.
I was thinking
a little
that.
bit starting to feel like that.
Well, what's funny is at the beginning of the year, I have a whiteboard here and I take off all the dates for all my teaching for last year because I keep everything up. So I can always see what I've done.
Yeah.
I erase it all. And then I look at the blank board and I sort of get depressed. I'm like, oh man, I don't have anything planned yet. Oh, poor me. And then, things start filling in. And now I'm like, oh yeah, wow. This summer is going to be a busy summer.
Exactly. I know.
It's going to be a very busy summer, which
is
good.
I think I got nothing happening. Oh yes, I do.
Yeah, we got a few things happening.
Indeed. So with that in mind, we're trying to figure what to talk about today.
Yeah.
And we've been talking a lot about all the guests we want to have on and kind of new things we want to explore. But one of the things I realized we haven't done, particularly as regards Brian's background, so there's a secret agenda here, is just how we learned what we learned, how you gather the information that is useful to become a teacher, to become a movement professional. How do you where do you get that from? And how did both, Brian and I in different ways come to where we are, which is, just loving what we do, totally passionate about it, have careers that are extremely fulfilling. And how did we get there? So a little bit, that was kind of our thought, to give a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of thought for you, maybe inspire you to go out and really dig into some things you're interested in.
Yeah. It's interesting when you talk about, who influences us, because everybody that I meet, everybody that teaches me anything goes sort of in that pile. And I have countless teachers. Now, some are much larger portions. I mean, if it were a pie graph, there are some that have huge wedges, obviously.
Yeah. And then little
some slivers, just slivers that I learned from here or there, a little bit. But every single person that I come in contact with, I like to learn something from them. And I think you're very similar. We talk to someone and I find them fascinating. And they could be any job. I tell a story. I was at a party once and it was one of those, forgive me, it was a boring party, Washington, D.C. type. Everybody was trying to outdo each other, what wines they buy, all this kind of stuff. And that's not me. That's not me whatsoever.
Yeah.
And there was someone quiet sitting in the back porch. And I walked over to him and I introduced myself, and his name happened to be Brian as well. And I'm like, oh, so what do you do? And he says, I'm a professional drag queen.
Okay.
And immediately I was like, you're going to be my best friend tonight.
Exactly. Let's talk. How does this work?
This is awesome, because when do you get a chance to discuss, talk, share? And he was so happy that anybody was willing, because he was just one of the neighbors and didn't really fit in. And to me, it was like, wow, you are the most interesting person here by far. I love this. Let's just talk. And I hung out with him all night. He
Nice.
was wonderful. And, it's just one of those things that you can do that in any situation if you're willing to
Yeah.
listen.
Yeah. Yep.
If you're
Absolutely.
willing to listen and not put yourself first in the conversation,
Mhm.
you can find out so much about people.
And so many unexpected things. I love that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's always amazing to me when you just listen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
a client of mine, I you and I are very similar. We're both somewhat introverted. We both, are, the quiet ones in parties and things unless we know people. Uh, and one of my clients who's pretty gregarious, I was talking to him about it and he said, "Oh, it's easy.
Mhm.
Just listen.
Yeah,
Ask
exactly.
questions."
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone wants to talk about themselves. No one really wants to listen to you. They want to talk about themselves. So if you show general interest, you could talk to everybody in the room all night long and never be bored. And I thought, that's pretty genius.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty true, actually,
And it
in my
is.
experience. Yeah.
It really is. So I find that everybody has been a teacher of one way, shape, or form. But for movement, because that's really what we're talking about, I think there are a few highlighted, and I'm sure you have a few as well.
So one of the things so similar to your pie story, when I turned this is random, but when I turned 33 and a third, I decided I was a third of the way to 100. And a lot of members of my family have lived well into their 90s. So I thought, well, maybe I'll live to 100. So this is the first third of my life. And well, partly because of just where I was. I was moving forward in my life and being a teacher and being a Pilates teacher and all that. And I said, oh, well, apparently I'm going to be a teacher. Apparently that's what I am. So I actually went out and I bought tea lights and candles to represent every teacher that I had ever had in my life. And I brought them back to at this point, I was living in this little tiny studio apartment in Oakland. And I basically put all the tea lights out and I basically sent like a little gratitude to every teacher I'd had. I
Wow.
had 150 tea lights going by the end of this experience because I was just looking back through all the people that have been important to me and all the people that have taught me something from the positive side and the negative side. And clearly, as you said, there's some that are, big parts of the pie and there's some that are less. Um, it's also what do you learn and how do you learn it? And
Hmm.
one of the things that I was a mover from the time I was a kid. My whole family were fairly physical in various ways. My mom was a dancer. My brother was a drummer. My older brother was a drummer. My sister was a dancer. My brother and I are dancers. And it was like movement was what we did. We swam, we hiked, we walked, we biked, whatever we were doing. And so movement was always part of what I loved more than anything. And then once I discovered dance, that was what I really focused on, complex movement. So thinking about growing up in that environment of appreciating the body, of appreciating what the body can do, of exploring the miracle that kind of is the body in terms of, oh, well, can I do this? Well, yeah, with practice, I can do that. That's really where I started was just this intrigue about what the body's capable of, what its
Mm,
potential is.
nice. Nice. Yeah. I was just thinking back, for me, not only for movement, but I've had a lot of careers. I've done a lot of things. I've done everything from stand up comedy to radio to you name it. I pretty much tried it. If it seemed interesting to me, my mindset is always why not try. And the worst thing that happens is you fail, or you get bored and you move on. And that's pretty much what happened most of the time. Is like, all right, ready for the next adventure. And in each one of those things that I've done, what I figured out is I need a mentor.
Mm,
I need
mhm.
someone that I can ask questions to. I need someone who is willing to hear me out, hear my questions, pull me in,
Yeah.
you know, and sort of show me behind the scenes because you don't always get that. You may
No,
have some natural
no.
talent, but in a lot of places, a lot of careers, there's very much me against you. You're not going to overtake me.
Where there's competitive weirdness, it doesn't
Yeah.
doesn't allow for sharing or for developing each other's skills. It's a lot about you have different skills than me. I need your skills. You don't have my whatever, all that competitive stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm.
And I've always seemed to be the guy who, because I show so much interest and because I'm willing to do anything, my philosophy, and I've told this to my kids, is just show up.
Yeah.
And when they ask, what does that mean? I say, every job I've ever wanted, I've literally shown up and just said, how do I do this? I
Yeah.
want in, and I'm willing to work for free, and I'm
Yep.
willing to do whatever it takes.
Yep.
And in radio, in stand-up, whatever it was, because I showed up, I was sort of, they thought, okay. And then I kept showing up and kept showing up. And eventually, when a position is open, they look at you and they think, well, he's shown up. He's
He's
sort of
still
has
here.
learned. He's still here. That I get my foot in the door somehow. And I've done that through just about every job I've ever had.
Mhm.
And that has always worked for me in general in life. So yeah, and when you do that, there's usually someone who's willing to say, who sees that there's a kinship usually, but
Mhm.
beyond that, that there's someone who's hungry.
Yeah. Yep. There's
And if
someone who's
you,
actually engaged.
yeah, and who
Yeah.
really wants to learn.
Yeah.
And that's the person who's always sort of said, okay. And I'm always someone, I've told the story to a bunch of clients before. When I got into radio, the person who took me under his wing was actually one of the best voiceover men in Hawaii. And he actually eventually went to Japan to do anime. He's an amazing voiceover work. And he gave me a commercial to do. I had just started and I was actually getting paid, and he gave me a commercial to do. And I did it in a wild, crazy voice. And in a big meeting, we had a big meeting with everybody, all on-air talent, salespeople, everybody. He played it. And he looked at me and said, this is one of the worst commercials I've ever heard. He looked at me and said, but I got to give you so much credit for the cojones you had to just go for it. And that's what won me over with him. He said, see me after the meeting. And he said, I'm going to teach you how to do this.
Awesome.
And he took me by the hand. And when he left to go to Japan, which was about a year and a half later, I took over his job for 6 months as production director at, I think I was 19.
Wow.
Of the #2 radio station in Hawaii. I mean, that was one of those things that I just sort of lucked into everything and just sort of kept stumbling my way forward.
Yep.
But because I showed interest, because I was willing to try and make a fool of myself, which you and I sort of joke about all the time, we're willing to go for it. It doesn't matter to us if we fall on our face, it's all for fun, But yeah, and I find that those mentors are essential to our growth
Yeah.
and, our, advancement.
I think about, yes. And it's for me, what was interesting was, this may sound funny, I didn't necessarily recognize the mentors that I had. I kind of had an
Mm,
image of a mentor that never quite showed up. And I had an interesting time realizing, like, that's a mentor I have a vision of, but it's not actually
mhm.
the mentors in my life. And this really came to me. I think I had some picture, and this is just coming from my background, of some teacher that's going to sort of come in and take you under the wing and tell you what to do. And that never really worked for me. I was very, I'm not sure stubborn's the right word, but or anti-authoritarian, because I nobody would ever think of me that way. But I was very independent
Mhm.
always, and I was always like, "But that's an interesting idea. Let me see if I believe that." Right? I never. I was. I say this about a good friend of mine who's a wonderful teacher, but who's also a wonderful student and a wonderful disciple, and has worked with many mentors over the years, and literally just sits at their feet and absorbs absolutely everything from them in a very, very open-hearted way, and then makes it their own, but really does the absorbing first. And I've never been good at that. I've never been good at, like, having somebody else tell me what I should be thinking or doing. I've always been, it's just, that's always been tough for me. So there you go. And at one point, when I was working with Diana Harold at St. Francis, who was my primary boss when I was first learning Pilates, it took me about a year, and I realized, oh, this is my mentor. And she did not teach by, she led by example. She
Mhm.
led by basically treating people with a phenomenal amount of kindness, clarity, and goodwill. And it was like, oh, that's actually my mentor, is just watching her do that. She
Mm.
had a phenomenal faith in the body. She had this ability to take a client who, I would look at it and go, wonder if they're ever going to get anywhere because they're really got a lot of issues going on. And 3, 6, 8 months later, they'd be doing something crazy on the Cadillac. And it
Nice.
was because she just very gently, I call her like the hill break of Pilates teachers. I used to have a Subaru when I used to, drive my Subaru in San Francisco, and there's all these giant hills, and it was a stick. But if you were on a hill, it would keep you from sliding backwards when you were in between gears, right? So, and she was like that. She just kept people from sliding backwards, and she would just keep gently marching them forward. Again, not with force, not with will, not from power, but really just from kindness and good-heartedness. And that
Nice.
was the mentorship that I needed at that time, and still, is ongoing for me.
Yeah. I in what you described yourself, I'm gonna say strong-willed because I find myself to be the same way. I buck authority. Probably in movement, my very first mentor was my mother. She was one of the top personal trainers and eventually became one of the top Pilates instructors in Hawaii. She had her own studio. And brief, how I got into this was I was always interested. I grew up very overweight. I was a big boy, 420 pounds at one time, and lost the weight, got into fitness, working out, all that sort of thing. And if you've ever been around someone like your parent, you sort of absorb around the dinner table things. I absorbed the gym without even knowing it. So first time I walked
Mhm.
into a gym, I felt comfortable. I felt, yeah, I know what to do. Did I
Yeah.
really? No, but I felt like I did because she always talked about it. So it felt comfortable. It didn't feel,
It wasn't foreign.
foreign. No, it
Yeah.
wasn't alien.
You're comfortable,
And
which gives you the base to be confident. Even
absolutely.
even if you don't know what you're doing, it's like, okay, at least I got this. I'm okay, and I can move forward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she injured herself. She went on vacation. First of all, Hawaiians, we're not supposed to ski. That's number one. Every adult that's learned to ski from Hawaii that I know has injured themselves. She decided to go skiing one year and tore every ligament in one of her
Oh
knees.
God.
Her whole lower leg did like a 360. It was
Oh,
horrible.
not
It was
good.
bad, real bad. And she called me up right after it happened and said, "You're interested in what I do. Do you want to do this?" And I said, "Well, I'm thinking of," and she goes, "No, you have to say yes or no now because I may lose the business. I'm going to go into surgery in a few days. I need someone to take over. And I've
Yeah.
got 3 days to make you a group aerobics instructor and a personal trainer. We have 3 days."
Holy moly. Okay, let's go.
And yeah, so we did it. And I worked with her clients and, you've met her before. She's fairly strong-willed as well. So she was back as soon as she possibly could, and basically I became her hands. And so my hands were on the client, correcting form and things like that. And she really taught me. And I found that I had an intuition for the game. And she said that immediately. She said, "You have to trust your intuition because you've got it. Not everybody does." And in mentoring other people here in my studio, I've realized that some people just have it, and other people, as much as they want it, it doesn't come natural to them. So I got lucky. I sort of stumbled into this career, backwards because I was floundering in school, didn't know what I wanted to do. And I went from being a mediocre student to being a 4.0 student immediately as soon as I got into this field. It was like everything made sense. Even things that I thought shouldn't, that I fought for years. I don't want to take physics. I don't want to take chemistry and biochemistry. Oh my gosh. And as soon as I got into it, I was like, this makes sense. I understand this. Why do I understand this? I don't know, but I understand. And that told me, okay, this is where I need to be. And that's when I focused all my attention toward, you know, fitness, movement, exercise, physiology.
So so this kind of gets us up to our beginning in a way, but I want to step back and I want to talk about intuition
Mhm.
for a moment because I find it I think it's an interesting thing. There's a lot of people that say, "Oh, I'm an intuitive mover," or "I'm an intuitive teacher," or whatever. And this is how I think of intuition when
Mhm,
I'm using it in that realm, like when I'm
mhm,
using it with a client. I think of that intuition as not being some magical thing that pops out of the air.
mhm.
I really think of it as developing an extremely robust database that helps to inform what you're seeing at an unconscious level, if that
Yes,
makes sense. Right. So I feel like for you, you absorbed at your mother's knee, as it were, literally,
literally.
because of your mother's knee anyway. Right. You absorbed that ability to look at a body and see a body and think about it like at the dinner table and then working with her.
Mhm,
And for me, a lot of that came from watching bodies in dance class, right?
mm,
And going like, okay, that body's better than that body. Why? What are they doing? What skill do they have? What mobility do they have? What is the characteristic of that movement that allows it to be more effective or more beautiful in this situation?
sure.
And you spend 20 hours a week staring at bodies moving and things go in, right? Your
Mhm,
database gets built. And one of the things that I think about for a lot of teachers in this work, and with personal trainer or Pilates or whatever it is there is just some time that has to be put in. And you have to love that time. It's not just putting the time in, because I know people who phone it in on a regular
yep,
basis in
yep,
terms of their teaching, and you see it all the time. And that's not it. If you actually care and you pay attention and you're on it and you're in it, then that's where you learn, right? It's being present, it's paying attention, it's being on it. And that's what builds that database and builds that knowledge background that then can become intuition
mhm,
and can become that like little insight that goes, I think I need to work on rotation with that client, or oh, that shoulder, what is going on there? I think they need to work on their thoracic mobility, like
yep.
whatever it is. Those little hits that you get come from developing that really robust database through paying attention and through really enjoying what you do, if you're paying attention with enthusiasm, right?
Mhm. For me, I couldn't agree more. I'm gonna add one thing to it,
Yeah.
okay? For me, intuition is the culmination of all that information put into the database, but being able to quiet your mind and get out of your own thoughts and out of your way.
Amen. Out of your shoulds and out of your boxes.
Bingo.
Yes.
Because there are
Yes.
times when I get quiet
Yep.
and a client will say, "What are you thinking?" And I'll just, for whatever reason, something pops into my head and I say, "I need to focus on this."
Yeah.
I don't know why. It's all that information from the back of my brain, that database is chugging along and it says, "Here's what you need to do." And I don't always know at that moment the reason why,
Yeah.
but I trust that little voice that's whispering to me, focus on this. I had it happen this morning. Client came in and there were just issues talking to me. And he said one exercise, he felt something going on. And immediately my brain was like, do, 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 do. And
Mhm.
okay, I knew the rest of the session immediately.
Yep.
And if you can get out of your own head and not second guess yourself, not get into the would, should, could, what,
Yep.
what would this person do, that person, it was just, okay, you get quiet within, you listen to it, and it will help to inform that. So for me, it's quieting that voice because sometimes I do get in my own head and I start overthinking, and then there's no intuition. Then there's clutter.
Right.
There's
Exactly. You're
clutter.
blocking yourself. So, but that being said, like one of the things I think you and I both do is we do a lot of teaching of students,
Hmm.
personal trainers and Pilates teachers. And And one of the things that this is kind of going against what we both just said, but there's also a way in which you have to build a strong foundation of understanding.
Yeah.
So there is some basic fundamental. This is how the body works. This is what anatomy does. This is what this movement will do for you. These are what these movements are. This is good form. This is good posture, or at
Hmm.
least this is better posture than that. Because there's always debates about what's good posture, whatever. But that idea that you also have, like, you have to, in some ways, you have to build the boxes first
Yeah.
and live within the boxes enough to be able to move past the box.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's like I think about for Pilates teachers, we've got so many ridiculous, large number of exercises in the Pilates world, right? So somebody first has to just get familiar with teaching all those exercises. Like
Mhm.
just teach these exercises. Don't think about what's happening. Don't worry too much about whether they're doing it right or wrong. Just kind of get them down and figure that out. Step one.
Mhm.
Same thing with personal training. What is a bicep curl? What is a tricep press? What am I looking for in a plank? Right? All those things. And then once you've gotten those down, then you start to see the subtlety. It's like you get
Mhm.
step one, and then you see the layers of each of those things. And it's in
Yeah.
that layers that you start to then be able to develop your intuition and expand your database beyond, I should do this after this, or this is the order of things that I do it in. Yeah.
It's the foundation.
Yeah, it's a foundation.
Without the foundation, like you said, learning all the exercises first. You can't correct an exercise until you know the exercise.
Right.
And you can't, in my opinion, you can't properly correct an exercise unless you've done the exercise. You know how it feels on the body, you know what's working, you understand, from your own body's perspective what went on. And yes, there are some people who have gone beyond that and can do it. We hear about people who are paralyzed and things like that. So I'm going to talk about the other 95% of people out there. You need
Yeah.
to be able to do it on yourself first. How does it feel? What's working? What's not working? Da 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 da. Da. That informs that database. It
Yes.
builds up that foundation so that when you have all of that together, then you can make those intuitive, choices and come from a place of solid background. It's not guessing then,
Right.
because some people say, "Oh yeah, I train by intuition." Okay, that could be guessing.
It could be guessing. It could be making stuff up.
Right.
Or it could be genuine. Like I don't know.
Could be.
And without knowing the person, I don't know any of those things.
Exactly.
So, in terms of how you developed a lot of the skills you developed, I
Mhm.
know you went to school, right? So you
Mhm.
got your degree in one of the many things
Pennies.
they've
Yep.
called it over the years, right?
Exactly.
Physiology, movement science,
Yep.
sports
Yep.
medicine. Like there's so many names they've called that over the years. And then you learned on the job a lot. You did a lot
Yes.
of just putting the hours in at the gym.
Yep.
And then you also went through this whole program of the medical exercise specialist
Yep.
program. So talk
Yep.
about how that maybe informed what you did or added to what you did.
I would say that that was probably the how should I put this? When working at a gym, you see most of the people you're going to see at a regular typical gym are going to be the back then about 90% of the people who had no injuries, who are just coming in to work out.
Yep.
And what I found was that through my mom's facility, we had a lot of injuries that we were working with. A lot of people coming after physical therapy and whatnot. So I learned a lot without knowing what I was doing. I kind
Yeah.
of learned without
Yeah.
knowing any background about it. But
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
okay. That's how I started. And then I was told, here's a program, the post rehab conditioning specialist program. You should do this. And it was created by a gentleman, Dr. Mike Jones. And when I took it, it blew me away immediately because it was all the stuff that I was doing. It gave me a reason that I was doing the things I was doing and told me a few
Yeah.
of the things that I didn't know. And I thought, oh man, I got to change that. Okay, I was making a mistake there. So it
Nice.
guided me.
Nice.
And that was sort of his first step. It's the American Academy of Health, Fitness, and Rehab Professionals. And that was sort of the first certification. Then there was the medical exercise specialist. And I went to Toronto and I did a 5-day course with him and really got to know him and really got deep into the program and went out afterwards and started practicing on my own. A couple years later, did the program again. It came into town and he asked if I'd be interested in just assisting. Sure. And I found that by doing the program again, after having a few more years of background,
Yeah.
of practice, I
Yeah.
learned a lot more. I
Yeah.
was like, oh, wow. And I asked him and I said, wow, you really changed. You taught a lot more. And he laughed and he said, I've been teaching the same class exactly for the past so many years. I said, really?
Yeah.
And it,
You just
and
you're able to
that's
take in more.
bingo.
Mhm.
Bingo, because I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, based on all those clients that I saw in the meantime, I built up my foundation much further so I could apply different knowledge that he was giving me.
Yeah.
And, I eventually began teaching for him and teaching, that was years ago. And, he really did help me a lot become, in my career, what I was. Uh, and also as a teacher, because he allowed me to go out and teach his information to help him go out there and teach. And much like, in uh, balanced body and Pilates land, you become a master instructor. I was one of the few master instructors that he trusted, and I appreciated that. And eventually I went out on my own and I developed my own style techniques. I worked with balanced body and all that sort of thing. But he was sort of that next line for me that was, okay, he has a lot to teach me.
Yeah.
I just need to listen and absorb as much information as I can. And that was really important.
So sometimes how I see these things is, and this is how I learn anyway. This is just my particular style. Is I find that I gather a bunch of data, and then I look for the structure that makes sense of it.
Mhm.
If you want to put it that way. So it sounds like you had the experience, and I love what you said about how you took the course and it structured your understanding. Is that a
Yeah,
way to put that? Like
absolutely.
sometimes a course just gives you the structure to put the information you have in boxes that make more sense.
Yep.
Right. So it's kind of like that information that's floating around in your head in this sort of amorphous form suddenly has like some structure and some clarity to it.
Yep.
And then what I really loved was, and then you went, years later, did the same thing and was like, you've added a lot of things to this. It's like, no, I haven't. You are just able to take in information at that next level.
Yes.
Right. Like I think of so many. This is a movement related moment, but I remember I was sitting in a ballet class at one point, and I was turning my legs out, and I was like, "Oh, that's that external rotator they've been telling me about for the last 20 years." Like I
Yep.
really hadn't felt that particular muscle doing that particular thing till that particular moment.
Yep.
And then I also use an example with a client, and Brian's heard this example, but I had a client I worked with forever, like once a week for 16 years, or more or less. And at one point we're working on her hip flexors. For the moment she came in, she had hip flexor pain, anterior hip flexor pain on one side. And I was trying to get her to basically kind of soften the front of the hip and allow the hip to flex without using the superficial hip flexors. That was kind of my goal. Okay. 16 years later, 16 years later, once a week for 16 years. Okay, that's 50 to anyway, a lot of sessions
A
later,
lot.
a lot. I was having her do a sort of actually a resisted hip flexor exercise on the trap table, I believe. And I said, okay, just like imagine that instead of like hinging at the hip, that you're going around a pulley. Just imagine like it's like a pulley. And she said, why didn't you tell me that before? And it's kind of one of those things like you look back over all the times you've tried to say that exact thing. And this was the moment 16 years later that it clicked.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that, I say about teaching all the time is until you have essentially, I think of it as the lock and key, right? Until you have the lock that is ready to be opened, that key is just going to keep banging you on the forehead.
Yep.
Right. And then once you have the experience or you have the opportunity, you need that information, there's some motivation, then that key can go in and actually turn the lock and let you into that next piece of information.
Yeah. We've all had those clients that, or what I think is the worst and ticks me off the most is, I've been saying the same words. I've tried 50 different ways to cue and I
Yes.
get close and it's not quite there. And then they
No,
go and work with someone else one time and they say, well, they said such and it just worked. I'm like, "Hmm."
exactly.
I and I use those same words. They needed
Uh-huh.
to hear it from somewhere else. I built up
Exactly.
that foundation and gave them
You
all that
did.
structure,
You
but
built
that
the lock.
I built the lock.
You
And
built the lock.
suddenly someone else's key is what it took at that
Yep.
moment
Yep.
to open and suddenly and over the years, I've learned not to take it personally now, and I say, "Oh, that's
Good.
awesome.
Right.
Good.
Thank
That's
God,
awesome.
finally. Yeah.
I'm glad it worked for you." Even though in my head, I'm just gritting my teeth saying, "You son of a gun, I can't believe you're gonna think that person was a genius, and I've been wasting your time for the last 20 years." Urgh. But yeah, you kinda need that.
Yeah.
And I think that you're right. It created a structure. This program created a structure that I needed because, like you said, I had been working with all these clients that had these issues. And what's interesting is now that I have people who mentor here, is I tell them, I said, look, the best place for a physical therapist or a physician to go and work after they graduate is a hospital because they're going to see 1,000 hips, a
Yeah,
thousand knees, and a
exactly.
thousand low backs within a year. And they're going to get those reps. You know, if you're in a
Yeah.
private practice, you're going to see the same few people
Yeah.
each week,
Yep.
and you're going to get really good at a few things, but you're
Right.
not going to have that repetition that you
Yep.
would in a clinic sense. Well, I say working in my facility, we see so many of everything that I say you're going to get that experience on a movement basis from either Pilates or personal training because we see so much here. And
Yeah.
you're going to see low backs, you're going to see shoulders, you're going to see knees, you're going to see hips, you're going to see all of this. And, after a few months, they're like, oh my gosh, you're right. Everybody's got an issue. I was like, yeah, that's why they come and see me, is
Right.
because this is what I do.
Yep.
And, I'm not a physical therapist. I'm just helping them manage their condition with exercise,
Yep.
and that's what the medical exercise specialist did for me, was give me that structure to build upon. Again, that was my foundation. Since then, I've built upon it a lot more. I've done a lot more research. I've put a lot more into that bucket,
Yeah. Yep.
you know?
Yep.
And the Mike, Dr. Jones, he said, when you have, you know, when you're first starting out, you're given a bucket,
Yep.
and then you're given like anatomy, some of the basics, and those are
Yep.
rocks. Those are big
Yes.
rocks. You're going to put those
Yes.
into the bucket. Well, the bucket's full now. Well, eventually, something else comes along, more information. Well, your bucket's full, but now you have pebbles. Can you fit the pebbles in there? Absolutely. So pebbles are now
Mhm.
going in there, taking up space. So you're building upon that original information. And then can you put more in there? Oh, even smaller pebbles. Oh, even smaller stones. They'll fit. And eventually, after everything else, and at the level I think that you and I are sort of at, is when you're adding sand, where you're
Yeah.
filling in all those nooks and crannies of all that information that you've spent a lifetime acquiring and bringing together. And now we're filling in all the gaps, and we're wanting to learn more because that's going to fill in a gap that we didn't even know was there.
Exactly. Exactly. So when I think about some other key moments in terms of learning. So, learning how to teach Pilates was just being at St. Francis, being in a medical environment, teaching Pilates for 10 years with and we had really an open gym situation. So we typically have 3 or 4 clients slash patients for each instructor. And they would
Mm-hmm.
just, come in during their hour. We would work with them. And so it was constant triage.
Mm.
Right, so it was constant problem solving. We didn't have privates. We didn't have like, I'm gonna work with this one client for the whole hour and figure things out. This one's coming in. Okay, their knees have flared up, their necks flared up. They can't lunge, blah, 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 blah. And we're running around the room trying to keep everybody going.
Yep.
So the stress of that, honestly, the positive stress of that was you had to figure stuff out fast. You had to make a
Yeah.
decision. You're not going to flex. You're not going to move your knee. I'm going to keep your legs straight, whatever it was, like kind of on the fly and quickly. So that was the first step. Then I actually went to do a Pilates teacher training program after I'd been teaching for 10 years because when I started there wasn't one with Michelle Larson in Santa Fe. And that was a little bit like in a inverse way, your medical exercise specialist. That was a formal, here's the Pilates repertoire, here's the exercises, here's something about them, here's where they go. And that gave me two things. It gave me the structure that I built up in my head, but it wasn't very
Mm-hmm.
clear, kind of like you said. And it also gave me that ability to critically think a bit, to go,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what are the skills that each of these, because I knew enough. I mean, I've been teaching for 10 years at that point. So, and intensively. So it wasn't like the exercises, I wasn't learning the exercise. I was learning that next, like you said, the pebbles or the sand of that exercise.
Yep.
Right. We're not like where the springs go and where the legs go, but like, what is the body doing there? And what am I focusing on? And that's really where a lot of the whole idea of movement principles came from me. It wasn't the
Mm.
exercises. It was, what am I trying to do? What are the skills I'm trying to build? How am I improving this entire structure in front of me? So
Mhm.
that gave me that structure piece. Then working with Eric Franklin on imagery, I did 2 years with Eric Franklin, which was powerful in terms of taking again what I knew and opening it up. So
Mm.
his work really like opened up my way of thinking about things. So it wasn't so linear, it wasn't so scientific, it wasn't so cut and dried. That was really helpful there. And then the anatomy in clay, just to take anatomy into a way that I thought was really, really effective. Um, and then just a million people along the way, a million people
Mhm.
that I've talked to, like, let's talk about hip mobility. Let's talk about, so I'm
Yep.
thinking some of the conversations you and I've had sitting sitting outside a conference.
Yep.
What do you do for this? What do you do for that? What's your approach to patellofemoral dysfunction? I
Mhm.
mean, simple stuff. And that learning from colleagues has also been really, really, really critical.
Absolutely. That's that's where it does fill in the sand for me.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
I've explained to people when, we started working together more closely, I said, "She's my mentor," but I said, "At the same time, I think that I'm also a mentor because we're learning from each other constantly." You know,
Exactly.
we're both bringing things to this relationship because we come from slightly different fields, but they're the same field, and we're always learning. And if we're receptive for learning because we want to, and that's I remember some of our first conversations sitting, down for, we're gonna sit down for an hour, and like 4 hours later,
I
we're
know
looking at our clock going, "Oh,
we
it's
just
dinner
didn't
time."
stop. Yeah, we got to go.
Yeah, or, "Oh, I have to teach a class. Oh, I have to do it in 5 minutes. See ya." You know?
Bye.
Yeah. And that was the sort of thing that was like, wow, a kindred spirit, but also someone that I can learn from.
Yeah,
And
both
those
ways.
people are, I wanna say countless, but at the same time, over the years, I've created sort of a funnel. When you
Yeah.
first start out, there's a lot of them, and you're learning from everybody.
Yep.
And I think you realize sometimes that some of them are full of it.
Yeah.
You
Or they're not your cup of tea.
they're just
They're just
whatever.
they're just they're just they just this doesn't work for you, right?
Right, and, but I think there are some people that you sit in their class, you're like, "Oh, wow, this makes no sense scientifically, this
Right.
just doesn't
You're
work for
just
me."
wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wrong, next. So, you begin to funnel, and you begin to take from here, and from here, and from here,
Mhm.
and the more I start talking to different people, a great example is Erica, the more I talk to her about, the neuro aerobics and things like that, I'm like, "Wow, that's fascinating, and I wanna learn more, because I can learn more. This is
Yeah.
very interesting stuff."
Yep.
And another reason why I wanna have on guests, because I want to learn from all these people, and I'm gonna tell you right now, there are probably gonna be some people after we've interviewed, I'm gonna say, "You know what? I'm not exactly sure that was 100% my cup of tea,
Right.
but it's interesting information. I'm willing to listen." Uh, but for the most part, I think that the people that we surround ourselves with are some of the highest quality in the movement game. And I have you to thank for that, because you sort of opened that door for me, with Pilates and balanced body and things. I started learning and meeting people who were of like-mindedness, but of a slightly higher caliber, that I was like, "Ooh, I feel really good around these people, and I'm learning constantly. This is where I need to be."
You know what I kind of love about the environment that we get to live in? I mean, really, we're kind of privileged to live in with
Mm,
a lot of the teachers that we work with and the presenters that we work with. Is one of the things that I kind of love is when I'm working with somebody who is a real, like, they have a specialty in a particular area.
yeah.
Like, I'm thinking of this gal Stephanie Camella from Zebrafish Neuro, and she works with spinal cord injuries. Like, she got out of school, UC Davis, and basically just started working with spinal cord injuries, and that has been her passion. So her Like where she and I there's a lot of places where we overlap in terms of our understanding, and then she has got a whole nother understanding of the nervous system, how the nervous system is affected by a spinal cord injury, the uniqueness of each person's experience with a spinal cord injury, how you stimulate the body, both the nervous system and the myofascial system, if you will, to make a change. Like,
Mm,
so talking to her is just it's taking what I do, but it's through a different lens. Like
yes.
instead of looking it to the right, I'm kind of looking to the left, and it's the same problem solving, but
Mhm,
with a different toolkit and a different vocabulary. And I love that. Like that is so much
mhm,
fun because it's like she'll just drop like a little concept and it's, like flaccidity versus spasticity, right? Which is
mhm,
kind of a typical thing in spinal cord injury stuff. Those things that we don't run into in ordinary clients, but that idea of muscle tone having a broader expression than just one is like, yeah, like some of my clients are like super, they're not spastic because that's not what they are, but just super like tight muscle tone. And other
yeah,
ones are like that, everything's kind of mush.
yep,
And so those learning from people that have very strong specialties in particular areas, and then taking that into how I see the world has been incredibly valuable so many times.
yeah. I remember a time when I was applying for a job, and the person actually pulled me aside, and, they had there was this questionnaire, and it was a very intense, like 10 pages. I would remember it
Oh,
was long. And one of the questions was, what is your style of teaching? Are you a
mm,
cheerleader? Are you a
mm.
psychologist? Or are you a drill sergeant? And I circled all of them and I said, all of the above and none of the above, depending on the client.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that really let me, and I had never put it into that context before. Sometimes you have to
Yeah.
be asked a question before you realize, what your answer is going to be, obviously. And I sort of sat there and I thought, yeah, everything depends on the client in front of me. And as a teacher, everything depends on the students in front of me. Because as you've discovered, sometimes you're teaching a course and you're getting no feedback and something's not clicking, something's not working. You got to change gears. Well, with clients, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just not clicking and you got to change gears really fast and be able to get them on track as quickly as possible. And sometimes they need to be poked with a stick, and sometimes they needed to be, guided with a carrot, you know, and sometimes they need to be hit over the head. I mean, there's the various ways of getting people's attention and getting them to the goal that we need them to be at. Uh, so I've always found that interesting, that question of who are you in your profession?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that
Yep.
that that came up when we were talking because I've had many different types of teachers. Last
Mhm.
night I was talking to my son and I was talking about the movie Whiplash. Uh, he and I talk a lot about superheroes and all this kind of stuff. Well, J.K. Simmons' name came up because he was in a superhero movie, and I said he's in one of my favorite movies of all time. And so it's called Whiplash. It's about a teacher and his student in music, and how this teacher is quite abusive. That was his style, very abusive. And when I watched it, I actually had someone in my life, one of the most formative teachers I've ever had, who was my ROTC instructor, Sergeant Major Kenneth Ching. He was by far, at that time in my life, what I needed. He was abusive unbelievably. He called me every name in the book because I was the biggest guy he'd ever worked with. And he called me every name known to man. I mean,
Mm.
but it toughened me up in a lot of respects. But he taught me more than almost anybody else. And I was explaining this to my son. I said, at that moment in my life, that's what I needed.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that resonated with me more so than other teachers who may have taken me by the hand and just said, oh, it's okay. Why don't we do? No, I needed someone at that time to teach me respect, to teach me discipline, to teach
Yep.
me. And I went back
To
to him
to kick
years
to kick
later.
your ass, basically.
Oh,
I
and
mean,
he
it's
did
some yeah. 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 Yeah.
big time. And like I said, he was really abusive. Compared to now, he would not be able to get away with what he did. This was,
Yeah.
20 some
The
odd years
old
ago.
days.
The old days are more than that, for almost 40 years ago. But it's what I needed. And at a different time in my life, it would not have worked, and I would have told him where to go. And in fact, my final year, I'd had enough of that relationship, and I walked out and I quit because I needed to move on.
Yeah.
I had learned everything I could at that moment. But after I had lost the weight, because he did teach me discipline, he taught me how to stick to things and how to make it, how to make a mission happen. And I went back to him 7 years later, something like that. And he took one look at me and his face dropped. He said, "I never thought you could do it." And I said, "It's because of you. You taught me that discipline." And I wanted to thank him. And again, it's what I needed at that moment. And years later, I learned from a lot of other different teachers, different things. And there are times when you need someone to take you by the hand and show you one step at a time. Here's what you do here. Here's what you do there. And other times you need tough love,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know? And
Absolutely.
I find that, depending on where you are, what you need, that's the kind of teacher, hopefully, you're probably going to attract at that moment. That's going to help you if you're open to it. If you're open to it, not everybody's open to, that experience.
That's a good story. That's a good story in so many ways because it brings up many things. It brings up the psychological aspect of what we do, right?
Mhm.
That 90% of what we do really is creating that connection with a client so that they can trust us, so that we can then do the work, right? Without
Mhm.
without some level of interaction that feels comfortable to that person, whether it's tough love or whether it's very nurturing, whatever that perspective is, without that cooperation in that relationship, you can't get anywhere.
Yep.
Right? Like that's kind of step one. And I think I think that also that requires the same kind of learning as whether they need to strengthen their hamstrings or stretch their quads. Right? It's the same kind of learning. It's understanding those personalities that walk in your door. And,
Mhm.
I'm sure for you too, I've gotten much better within that intake moment, right? Those first 5 minutes of the intake.
Yeah.
I kind of have a strong sense of their personality and which way I need to
Yes.
show up to match that personality in a way that's effective. And obviously you refine that over time.
Yep.
And that flexibility, right? Create that flexibility. So you can be the drill sergeant. You can be like a bit authoritarian and judgmental when you need to be. You can be, kinder and gentler and safer when you need to be, and somewhere in between.
Yes. Yes.
Right. That's part of that database building. Is not just the skills, but it's also the psychology.
Yeah. And we all have our language. And
Yeah.
depending on the client in front of me and what they need, I have one person who wants more of that drill sergeant. He wants to just be told. And there are times when I'll say, "Well, that just sucked." And I
Right.
would never say that to, I'm thinking of
No.
other clients
Right. Like
where
like
I
you
would
would
just say,
ever do that.
right. I just say,
Let's try that
"Yeah,
again. Let's do
not what I
something a
was
little different.
quite looking for. Let's adjust this." And
Right.
I just call it like I see it with him. He's a golfer. He wants to get his, I gotta
Yeah.
do this, and he doesn't want to waste time. So if
Yeah.
it's bad, tell him.
Right.
And
Exactly.
we
Move
have
on.
that relationship.
Yep.
So you have to learn as you go
Yeah.
and know where that relationship is. Like you said, you learn pretty fast when the person's in front of you what they're looking for or what they need.
Well, you
Because sometimes
try.
you try.
So
And
well, so
again,
you
comes out
learn.
to intuition too. You learn over
Exactly.
time.
You learn over time. Like, okay, this person I've got to do this with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. So it is interesting that we have to modify our teaching styles,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
and I find I'm sure you have to do it. You've mentored 1,000 times more people than I have. Uh, but I've had a number of interns come through here and a number of people who start, and I tell them, look, you may have your degree, you may have an advanced degree. This is going to be your PhD because you're learning on the job. You're going to learn with real bodies. This isn't
Yeah.
conceptual. This isn't
Yeah.
theoretical anymore. This
Yeah.
is real bodies,
Yeah.
and you can hurt them.
Yeah.
And one guy actually left because he hurt a client. I went out of town. I came back and she had emailed me, said, "I won't work with him. I am in so much pain."
Mhm.
And when I came back, I spoke with him and I spoke firmly. I said, "Look, here's what happened." and he
Uh-huh.
couldn't accept the fact that he had hurt somebody because he
Oh,
thought he was doing all the right things. And again, I said, this is a learning experience.
yeah.
But he had a hard time. He eventually became a physical therapist.
Mm.
He went to Howard University and became a PT and has done very, very well. But at that moment, he couldn't take that feeling that he did the wrong thing, and I needed to be able to tell him at that moment. And again, as a manager and as a mentor, I have to do it just right, because you say it too harshly,
Yeah.
you could lose them. You say it
Yeah.
too gently, they don't get it. And
Yes.
sometimes it's hard to, you know, yeah, you
Moderate
got to weigh
that.
that out.
Where's that
Yeah.
balance? Yeah.
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 And it
Exactly.
can
Where
be
am I gonna
challenging.
not crush their spirit, but tell them something challenging, right? They need to
Yes,
hear this. Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we've all been on the other side of that before,
Yeah.
you
Absolutely.
know, when someone's told us, what we don't want to hear necessarily. And how we take it is how we grow.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, yeah, so I've had a lot of teachers. I've had a lot of people who have influenced me in my life, that, I'm going to take this opportunity to say I'm thankful and I'm
Me
very
too.
grateful,
Absolutely.
because I would not be where I am today and I would not be talking to you if it wasn't for my mom making that first introduction into this field. If it
Yep.
wasn't for Dr. Mike to bring me to that point and say, okay, here's a structure to build upon,
Yep.
you know, and then also to you for opening the door of teaching and being able to say, hey, I like your style of teaching. I think you have something to offer that we can use a balanced body and we can grow together.
Yeah.
So, and that was sort of yeah, this is the right place for me to be too. So I
Awesome.
thank you as well. So,
No, it's hopefully out there, whoever's listening to this, like this is just an opportunity for you to reflect on your teachers, your
yep.
influences, where you want to go, how you want to get there. And I want to take one thing of what you said, which is do not be afraid to just go after that person you want to learn from.
Yes.
I I say this in a funny way, but I'm going to say it this way. Um, when I was first doing my teacher training with Michelle Larson at Core Dynamics in Santa Fe, this after been teaching for 10 years, I realized that one of the emotions that was coming up was jealousy. Not in a bad way, not like not the green-eyed monster jealousy, but like I want to do that. Like I saw what she was doing, I liked her
Yes.
teaching style, and it's like I want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so then I basically went, okay, that's what I want to do. Like it was clear to me that I want to start teaching. I want to figure out how to do this. And that's where I then started to put my manuals together and started teaching at Turning Point and going on from there. But a lot of it was then really watching her teaching, watching not what she was saying, because that was not the news, but how was she bringing it across? How was she getting people involved? And most of the presentations I watch, I'm not looking for content. I'm looking for how are they teaching? How are
Yeah.
they engaging? Are they engaging? What's working with that? And so hopefully this will just encourage you guys to go out there. And if there is somebody you want to learn from, go learn from them. Like,
Absolutely.
find a way to if something really intrigues you and it makes you hungry, go find a way to partake of it. Many people in both of our worlds love to have students come and work with them. And a lot of us are teachers anyway. And just go out there and find that thing that really lights you up, because that's what's going to keep you happy. That's what's going to give you what you need for the rest of your career.
And don't be afraid to ask for what you want,
Yeah.
because the worst thing that happens is they say no or not at this time.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing that can happen. The best thing is, all right, let's do that.
Or
Let's do this.
let's start down the path. If now
Yeah.
isn't the right time, if like you're not ready yet, but I can help you find the way there, right?
Yep.
Jump on, man. Jump on it. That's how
Absolutely.
that's how you grow.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, hopefully you guys learned a little bit about our past and, our teachers. And like you said, I hope you were able to ruminate a little bit about the teachers from your past that, you know, inspired you, helped mold you. I think, in creating the body, I always say it's like taking a big piece of marble and chiseling it with a toothbrush. It's going to take a long time.
Yeah,
But you
absolutely.
know what? It's the same thing with us in our careers,
Mm,
because you meet someone else and suddenly another shape is taking form. You meet
right.
someone else and learn something else and another shape is taking form. And maybe what you saw that piece of marble being at 10 years ago looks different today than you thought it
Absolutely.
did.
Absolutely.
That's okay. Those teachers have helped shape who you're becoming and who you've become, and hopefully who you want to be in the future. So hopefully we've, you know, let you think a little bit on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you have any questions that you'd love to have us answer, or reach out to us, reach out. Movingconvos@gmail.com is the best way to get in touch with us. We're on our social medias. We're doing more and more on social media, so keep our eyes open on that. Moving Convos on Instagram, Moving Conversations on Facebook. And if you go to the show notes, you're going to see Nora's and my personal socials as well. So hit us up, subscribe, hit all the buttons. Check us out on YouTube. I think that it's really interesting. I actually was watching the one with Erica. It was fascinating to watch all three of us. And I thought it was pretty cool to have an opportunity to see facial expressions and things like that.
Mhm.
So check us out on YouTube as well. And until we see each other next week, for Nora St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We'll see you then.
Bye, guys.